not being horny. I think it's really as simple as that. Like it's a weird thing to explain because like I honestly don't think I actually understand what horniness is. So it's weird to be like, yeah, I'm not that because I don't actually believe it exists.
The one I heard and the one that made the most sense to me was just a person who does not experience attraction of a specifically sexual nature. So that's kind of the one I use. I use asexual as my term. I don't subdivide it because I prefer the blanket term. I think it fits me best. So
it's spectrum, or it's a broad swath of, oh God, it's such a big tent. I want to say identities, but I feel we could also, how to say identities for simplicity's sake, but a large swath of identities and orientations that are united by either a lack of interest in sexual stimulation or lack of ability to feel sexual attraction or drive.
So it's funny how people are always worried about what's the definition, what is defining, and it's lack of desire, lack of attraction, lack of this, and it's always framed in terms of lack. And I always think of it as not what's missing, but what's possible.
I mean, I think the definition I've been trying to train myself to use, I think the one that's kind of most common is saying that asexuality is people that lack sexual attraction. But I think there's been a lot of discourse lately about how using the word lack kind of isn't the best word. It makes it seem like you're missing something or it's negative. But it also leaves out people like me who sometimes do have sexual attraction. So I like to use, asexuality refers to people who experience little to no sexual attraction, kind of less than normal, I guess, whatever that means. But yeah.
The whole spectrum from being like sex repulsed to sex positive does need to be understood more, because not all asexual people are going to like cringe when they see like bare skin. It's not, it is like that for some people, but for other people it's like not at all. Like other people can fully have sexual relationships, and there are people who can have sexual relationships after like getting emotionally close with a person. It's like a whole spectrum.
Even if I don't even want to break it down, because like for me, if I just use asexual, then I get to have all the details.
It's true that the community has definitely come into its own in recent years, but I mean, aspec people have always existed. When you see stuff about Stonewall, asexuality is mentioned in a lot of the documents about Stonewall. And, obviously in the past, there were a little bit more stringent expectations about how people were to act and how people were to, you get married and have a kid. And obviously we still have that, but it was even more stringent in the past. And so if you were aspec, like, you didn't have space to talk about it, or it wasn't an option to kind of like be open about it. And I think because of the internet, and because we've kind of moved forward as a society a little bit past the whole compulsory heterosexuality, that sort of thing, people have been able to find community with each other via the internet. The aspec community is smaller than a lot of other queer communities. I mean, they say it's between 1% and 5% of the population, which is still a lot of people. Like that's 7 million people at least. But, we're more scattered. And so I think the reason why it's considered new is because we're just now kind of finding each other and kind of creating the community that other queer identities founded earlier on. Because it was a little bit easier for them to find each other.
I think it's kind of just a fundamental misunderstanding of like what it means for an identity to be new. It's like, I remember in history class in high school, we would be talking about like ancient Rome and Greece, and people would be like, oh, like everyone was having sex with each other, like all of these men were gay. And it's like, okay, they were partaking in what we would now call homosexual activity, But at the time, the word gay didn't exist. If you asked one of them, they would not identify as gay. That wasn't a thing. But that doesn't mean that, that activity didn't exist. So maybe, the identity of asexuality is, come into, fruition in the last 10, 20 years. But like Sarah said, people like that have always existed. There's a lot of, I don't know, like famous people from history that people kind of look back on and are like, seems like they might have been asexual. Like they kind of weren't really doing much with other people.
The idea of marrying for romantic love is also a fairly new phenomenon. So it's entirely plausible that you could have had a lot of ace people that married because that is how you existed in the world and the society that they lived in at the time. That was how you had security and connections and relationships, and whether or not you were attracted to the person wasn't actually particularly important.
The feelings, the mindset, the biological and the psychological influences that might cause someone in 2020 to identify as asexual have certainly existed throughout humanity. But that's a little bit different than saying that an identity has existed throughout humanity. So I might argue that asexuality as an identity, as a kind of cultural force, is incredibly modern. Kind of like in the same way that, like, there have been people living in, France since the dawn of humanity, but the idea of a French identity still probably didn't really exist until sometime in the modern era. The same thing kind of goes for asexuality. I remember when I was first really trying to figure out if I was asexual or not, and I was doing, a lot of Googling, famous asexuals, and there are a couple now. But oftentimes what I would find is a lot of articles saying, like, well, this guy, and these were always guys, like, well, this guy in the past, he was not known to have any lovers, male or female, therefore he was probably asexual. When historically, there are probably a lot of people that we might think of as asexual were just closeted gay men back when it wasn't very safe for them to be open.
Mm-hmm.
Can I use bad words?
Yeah, of course.
Bullshit.
It's so... I'm sorry, I'm not gonna curse.
No, you can swear.
It's so fucking, like... Honestly, I'm just gonna say stupid. It's just fucking stupid.
Forgive my French, I think it's absolute bullshit.
Besides struggling with being asexual in general, I've also had the struggle where it's like, am I valid in saying that I'm a part of the LGBT community? Because, like, I have siblings who are very much part of, like, the LGBT community. I've got L, B, and T in my family. So it was really honestly thanks to them, just being like, it's a choice almost, like whether or not you want to see yourself in that community. And I do. I think it's a beautiful community, and I don't think that people should be kicked out of it, especially when they're like looking for love and not trying to stir up hate. I'm just here for a good time. Like,
in general, I don't like gatekeeping. I really, really don't. I am in a outwardly very heteronormative relationship. I'm married to a man. And I don't see as much of the discourse. I'm not super out, if you will. But that's something that I do take a lot of issue with, because I think a lot of the fear, a lot of the questioning, a lot of the things that make you scared to be yourself, that's true in asexuality. As much, it might look a little different than it does in other areas of the LGBTQIA community, but it's very much real.
It's very funny because I'm straight, or what's referred to as heteroromantic, and I don't always consider myself to be part of the LGBTQ community. If an organization or group has A in the initialism, and the A explicitly stands for asexual, because there are some older groups for which A stands for allies instead. But I don't necessarily feel that it's my place to interface with them if they don't have asexual in the title, because I am effectively a straight man who does not have a lot of sex.
I found that people in the LGBT community were a bit aggressive, and that has to do with the fact that the historical the fight for being able to express different types of sexual behaviors and performances was so violent, and it remains violent in many countries around the world. It's still forbidden to exercise or practice certain types of sexual behavior. It's such a heavy, they've paid such a heavy tribute that I understand that they find it undermining for some group of people to come along and say, well, you don't want to do that sort of thing. We're not interested in that sort of thing. That's just not who we are. Whereas they've been fighting so hard for some people to just be able to be sexual in their own.
Kind of becomes this game of like, it's the oppression Olympics. Like, oh, you know, you haven't been denied the right to marriage or whatever. So like, it's kind of absurd because, you know, if everything was going by the oppression Olympics, then, you know, the most important people in the community, the only ones like welcome in the community would be Black trans women, not white gay men. So like it's absurd on its head. But I think it hurts more coming from queer communities, because it's like your whole point is you're supposed to be a space for people who are outside of the supposed norm. And then you're saying that what I experience is valid, but you won't welcome me for some reason.
But I think also in terms of ace discourse, something I've seen people online talking about recently is like why we call it ace discourse, because I think that's been the term that people have used since, you know, asexuality got big on the internet, is, you know, people being exclusionary, people fighting about if asexuality is real, we call it ace discourse. But you never hear people say like gay discourse or bi discourse. It's called like homophobia or biphobia. So it's interesting that we're kind of padding it and not calling it maybe exactly what it is.
I think many people, I discovered, I don't know what I was doing on something on the internet, and I was probably put some weird question into the search engine, and then Avon came back to me, right? Mm-hmm. That was what popped up, and I was like, wait a minute. And then you start reading and scrolling through, and you're like, but that's me too. And I recognize that, and I remember that, and oh my goodness, and they're speaking my language.
I grew up in a very sex positive household. And, you know, growing up, especially when I was a teenager, I was always taught, you know, there's nothing wrong with sex, nothing shameful with sex, and you could have as much sex as you want. But I don't really think it ever dawned on my mother, who is the main driver of that sex positive philosophy, that as much sex as you want could be zero.
I realized I was asexual about a year ago. During that time, I was just very balled up, I guess, and like because I was so busy, I was like, I'm just gonna stay balled up until like Thanksgiving break. And over Thanksgiving break, I went home and like cried on the floor and was like, and I think that was like one of the first times I had said it, where I was like, I'm asexual. And honestly, since then, it's been great. Like, things have made so much more sense.
Yeah, I grew up just assuming I was straight, as I think a lot of people do. I didn't have anything to prove otherwise, because I had never like felt same-sex attraction or anything of the sort. I just kind of assumed I would do the whole, you know, marriage, like marry a man, 2.5 kids, white picket fence thing, because that was just what was expected of me, what I saw in the media, what I saw around me. To me, it just seemed like I was kind of a late bloomer. Like I just didn't have any interest in that right now, and eventually I would. And then when I was in 11th grade, I had a teacher who was unmarried, no kids. She was a teacher, so she didn't get paid very much, but because she had that freedom of, not having a spouse or children, she was able to spend her money like traveling the world. So like she would, over the summer go on all these amazing trips. And that kind of opened my eyes to like, oh, there's another option here.
I think I also had a general idea of what asexuality was, but wasn't, super familiar. So we would talk about it. And I think the more we talked about it, the more I realized like demisexual might be something I am. There was someone else in one of our theater club. There was someone who identified as demisexual, but at first I thought that meant that you were also bisexual, or like I had a weird idea. I was like, oh, well, if you're not sexually attracted to someone until you're romantically, interested, that means you could get romantically interested in anyone. She told me that, and I was like, okay, like good for you. But yeah, the more we talked about it, the more I was like, maybe kind of. But I was in a long-term relationship at the time, and we had like already had sex. The sexual attraction was there. So I was like, oh, it doesn't matter if I am. Like, I didn't think it was relevant. So I kind of just stopped thinking about it. And we started the podcast. So we started talking about it even more. And in some episodes, you can hear me say like, oh, I might be demisexual, but whatever. And we would just kind of move on. And Sarah was like, okay, you definitely are, but like, I'm not going to say anything. And then
the whole premise of the podcast was that it was me, an aro ace girl, talking to you, a straight girl, about like, me having questions about like, how long is sex supposed to last? I don't understand. And then, pretty early on in the process, you were like, actually,
I don't know. We might have to change the whole podcast.
Yeah, I always wanted a partner. And I didn't come to the term asexual until only a few years ago. So I was deep into my 20s when I finally came to that. And it was very freeing because I had been trying to date and I felt like I was bad at it. I felt like there was a playbook that everybody else had that I just didn't get. And one of the jokes I made a lot was, I like him a lot and I enjoy spending time with him, but I just don't want to lick his face at the end of the day. And are you supposed to want to lick someone's face? That should have been the first hint. I also just want to bring up the fact that like being in a relationship with a non-ace person, we have to have a lot of conversations around consent and around opting in and around safety. And that's super important to any relationship. Like it shouldn't be exclusively the domain of asexual persons. Like it's incredibly common to have two people in a relationship that have different drives and different libido. So that's a conversation that all of us should be having. And just because it's a little more pronounced in my relationship doesn't mean that relationship is somehow invalid.
Compulsory heterosexuality, but also compulsory allosexuality and amatonormativity. Basically, the idea is that like everyone should experience like sexual and romantic attraction. Something we've talked about a lot on the podcast is, can you think of a song that's not about love or sex in some way? Okay, can you think of another one? Like most songs are about love or sex in some way. Most TV shows and films have some sort of romantic plot or subplot. We're just inundated with all of this information. And, you see people being like, oh, that 5-year-old kid's a heartbreaker. And it's like, the kid is 5. It's so pushed onto us from such a young age. And you're asked, do you have a crush on this person? Blah, 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 blah. And so it's the problem that a lot of asexual people have is they don't realize it's an option.
It's kind of interesting to think about like how we got to this moment in like whatever this is, like the fourth or fifth wave of feminism, whatever we're in. It's kind of talked about as like sex is talked about as a liberation thing, like, oh, women are free now, which first of all, no, we're not. So go out and have sex with as many people as you want, like live your Sex in the City life, like hook up all the time, experiment, do whatever, but that doesn't really kind of encompass also having the choice to not do anything at all. It's kind of just talked about as the choice to do everything. So I think that makes it kind of hard for some women who are like, no, I'm a feminist, like I'm very, like into all of like the liberation stuff, but you kind of sometimes feel like, oh, I look like I'm being a prude, or I look like I'm not kind of participating in this whole movement that's happening. And then for men, it's a whole different thing of like, men are supposed to be super sexual and into sex all the time. And then ace men, it's kind of like, okay, well, maybe I'm not. So it's just kind of this weird modern moment that we're in where, sex is like free and, everything is happening, and there's kink culture, which, can be participated in by ace people too. But there's all of this stuff happening. And I think it kind of forgets to give people a choice to just do nothing.
A long time, like coming out to myself, and then also some time afterward to start to feel like an adult. Like I am a grown person. I pay my taxes. I have an IRA. It's very boring. But I never felt like I reached adulthood for a long time. And I find myself wondering, so many of our coming of age stories are cinematic shorthand for teenager has first sexual experience. Like, how do you feel like an adult if you don't go through the classic coming of age?
There are some people who could go over to strangers' houses in the middle of the night and like fuck and never see them again. And they're completely comfortable with that. And there are other people who are like, no, I don't really want to have sex with anybody that I don't know, that I'm not emotionally connected to, that I haven't like gotten to know over the first few dates or whatever. That is a spectrum. That literally proves asexuality is valid, because like there are some people who are here on the spectrum, and then you're saying they're around here on the spectrum, which means the spectrum can continue over here into people who don't really want to have sex at all. So, oh God. Yeah, and I honestly think that understanding that, that breaking that stereotype that you're either super horny all the time or don't want to have sex or be touched or be seen ever, breaking that like binary that we've created and more promoting the whole spectrum would be so helpful to society in general, to straight people, to all people, because like comphet is a thing, like compulsory heterosexuality is a thing, and it's very prevalent, but compulsory sexuality is also a thing, and it's going to affect more people in general who feel pressured to have sex, to feel pressured to do things outside of their comfort zone because they feel like they aren't on this end, they aren't on this binary, so they have to be this binary. You can be just do whatever you feel comfortable with.
Yeah, that's our representation. It's robots. And apparently that one episode of House where he cured asexuality.
I have a patient who's asexual.
A giant pool of algae?
See more asexual characters. I would also personally like to see more asexual characters that are in relationships and aren't both asexual and celibate.
Stereotypes of asexual people, automatically robots, plants, we hate to see it, children. Oh my God, I hate being compared to a child. And it's hard because like I have like childish interests outside of being asexual, but it just hurts because like it's just annoying seeing like all of the posts online being like, all of these other people are over there like swooning over like bikini men and women, and they're all like, oh, whatever, they're so hot, and like asexuals are over here like, hee hee, dinosaurs. And I understand that I am wearing a dinosaur hoodie right now. I see that. I put that on this morning. However, it makes me feel so invalid as a human being to be compared to an infant because I don't experience sexual attraction. It's such bullshit.
I don't know. I think at the moment we're pretty dry on representation, and it's it's just really sad, obviously, because then people like me and Sarah kind of take years to realize that we might be, kind of different, or there might be other options. And I don't know, I think the representation that there has been some of it has been really good, but it's often very focused around like coming to terms with your asexuality or learning what asexuality is. And we don't have a lot of characters that are just happen to be asexual, the way that some characters just happen to be gay, but also like have other storylines. And of course, not a lot of diversity in the representation in terms of race or gender, or, kind of disability or anything like that. So I think the most famous was Todd from BoJack Horseman.
Be Todd from BoJack Horseman.
What's your deal? I feel like you like me, but you don't like me, but you like me, and I don't know what that is. Are you gay?
Whoa, why would you even...
You can tell me if you're gay, it's fine. This isn't the 1600s or some places in the present.
I'm not gay. I mean, I don't think I am, but I don't think I'm straight either. I don't know what I am. I think I might be nothing.
Oh, well, that's okay.
Yeah?
Yeah, of course.
I am an asexual person. I am asexual.
That's great.
Being asexual was never the forefront to his personality. He was like out there doing his Todd thing from the beginning.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
When nothing is sexy, everything gets to be sexy. And I don't know, I don't get anyone else's experience, but I know for me, like the amount of like sort of joy and pleasure that I can get from a really good steak, a perfect ball of yarn, like it's fun. It's really fun. I feel like I get a huge amount of sensual pleasure from the world around me in ways that I don't know if people distracted by sexy things get to enjoy as much.
The thing I point to automatically when thinking about like the positives of being asexual is the amount of time I have saved by not being horny.
I've definitely become more aware of kind of like looking at my whole life through like what we call like the ace lens or the aspec lens, which is like, you don't have to do anything that society tells you to do.
I mean, I think just in terms of the podcast, being able to find that community elsewhere too. Like we've been able to meet a lot of really cool people, interact with really cool people who are super diverse, like all different ages and races and genders and everything like that. Like that's just been like, if I wasn't in this community, I would never meet people like that. So